speaking of performative art, as some people may have referred to it, when Pauline Hanson wore a burqa into the Senate before the chamber rose for the year in 2025, Senator Hanson copped a 7-day suspension for that. It was called a stunt. She's done it twice before. I have some sympathy for Pauline when she tries to do this, because having sat in the Senate with her constantly, any motion that she puts up, regardless of its merit, is blocked by the Greens and Labor and the so-called independents that always vote with the left-wing parties in the Senate. And whether you like Pauline or not, she has a reasonable chunk of the vote, and her support is increasing across the nation. And I do think it is fair that her views, her input and the motions that she puts up should at least be given the respect to be debated. And yet again, when she did call out for the burqa to be banned, it was blocked in the Senate and no debate could take place. But she was then given a 7-day suspension with the faux horror that was then projected by leaders of all the major parties in the parliament, disrespecting the parliament. Senator Hanson's now written to Prime Minister Albanese asking for that to be lifted. So
before you go, there's something even more surprising coming next. The next clip reveals what they didn't want Australians to notice, and it's already changing the political landscape. Stay with me, make sure you're subscribed.
So that when debate resumes, as Parliament's recalled early, with regards to the new hate laws that need to be debated, that she should be able to participate. And I got to say, I think that's fair enough. I think as democracy goes, a 7-day suspension is one thing, but when you have an extraordinary circumstance that leads to extraordinary calling back of Parliament early, any of those things I think should be lifted, and every parliamentarian should be given the opportunity to speak, because at the end of the day, big chunk of Australians voted for her and deserve her voice to be heard in this debate. And it will be an increasing chunk of voters.
Yeah, that's right. Look, I agree. I have some empathy for her. My frustration comes from the fact that, yes, I can see that it was a performative stunt, but the conversation then moves from the public going, oh, there's Pauline doing that thing, you know, how disrespectful to a religious garment. But the conversation actually should have been that she was trying to protest that her bill she put up was not allowed to be debated.
And this was every bill she puts up, every bill.
Absolutely. But then, because then she goes and does that, that's what makes the headlines, and everyone just kind of rolls their eyes and goes, oh, there's Pauline doing that again. So that's frustrating. I want to ask, as the ex-senator here, the suspension on her, that 7-day suspension was obviously put on her by the Senate. She's written to the Prime Minister. Does he have that authority to intervene on disciplinary action with the Senate? They're two separate houses.
It would have to go, well, it would have to go back to the Senate and the presiding officers. So the President of the Senate would have to then bring it back to the Senate. It would, look, not being sitting there with the, you know, I don't have my Senate handbook and standing orders here anymore, but it would have to be re-voted on by the Senate, because the Senate voted for the suspension, so it would have to be lifted that way, unless it was considered a special joint sitting or something that occurred.
Now here's where things get even more interesting, because what happened next completely changed the tone of the debate, and most people completely missed it. Stay with me, make sure you're subscribed.
I just think it's really ironic that the bill Pauline Hanson was trying to put up was warning about the dangers of these face coverings, which I think is a very legitimate concern. Many countries around the world have banned the full face covering. And then a couple weeks after that, we did have a radical Islamic terror attack that has rocked our nation. Now we've got the Parliament voting on a legislative response to that radical Islamic terror attack, but because she was too eager to call it out and performed a stunt, she won't be able to vote on it. I mean, it does not make sense to me on any level. This is completely undemocratic. And also, how many Greens MPs have worn a keffiyeh into Parliament? How many times have they protested?
Sarah Hanson-Young holding up the fish, the dead fish.
And do they get suspended? Do they get removed from
Rex Patrick used to come in dressed as a koala. Like, honestly, I mean, at the end of the day, there is a really strong anti-Pauline sentiment, and I have always been uncomfortable with the response through the coalition parties. Is their almost knee-jerk reaction fear to support anything Pauline does. There were a number of motions she brought when I was there, one including with regards to babies born alive through the abortion process, which occurs. It went to a conscience vote within the Liberal Party. And, you know, there were a few of us that were there supporting Pauline, and there were colleagues of mine sitting opposite. voting with the Greens and Labor. Same when it came to her motion with regards to children being puberty blockers. It was blocked on that immediate sense. And again, a conscience vote was given to the Liberals so that some could go and vote with Labor and the Greens. And I have always found that very unsettling. I never liked it. I was hoping when Michaelia came in as leader of the Senate that she might have got tougher on the parliamentary Senate team, that it wouldn't be a matter of conscience vote, that those sorts of principles and values are something that the Liberal Party does uphold, but there seems to be a knee-jerk reaction against Pauline, and I think it's backfiring on the coalition across the board.
It is, and it's just pathetic.
What we're seeing in this Senate exchange is not just another policy debate, but a much deeper clash over how Australia manages one of its most critical national resources, water, and who ultimately gets to control it. At the center of this argument is Senator Pauline Hanson, who raises serious concerns about foreign ownership of water entitlements. She presents figures showing large volumes of water rights held across multiple countries, including the United States, China, the United Kingdom, and others. For many viewers, these numbers sound alarming, especially when framed as foreign control over something as essential as water. However, to properly understand what is being discussed here, it is important to clarify a key distinction. In Australia, water itself is not owned in the traditional sense. What exists is a system of water entitlements and allocations, which are legally regulated rights allowing access to water under strict national frameworks. These rights can be traded, leased, and in some cases held by foreign investors, but they remain governed under Australian law and oversight. This is where the debate becomes more complex. Senator Hanson is essentially arguing that this system has gone too far in opening up water access to market forces and foreign capital. Her concern is not just economic, but also political and emotional, linking water control directly to national sovereignty and the survival of rural farming communities. She highlights a major tension in Australian policy, the balance between market efficiency and public ownership of essential resources. The current system, developed over decades, was designed to allow water to flow to its most productive use through trading mechanisms, especially in times of drought and scarcity. In theory, this improves efficiency and supports agriculture by allowing flexibility in allocation. But critics argue that this same system can also create inequality. When water becomes a tradable asset, prices can rise during shortages, potentially making it harder for smaller farmers and rural communities to compete with larger investors or corporate entities. This is where the emotional weight of Hanson's argument comes from, as she links water access directly to the survival of farming towns and regional economies. Another major point raised in the exchange is transparency. Hanson questions why public registers show aggregated foreign ownership data without naming individual owners. While this is not necessarily evidence of wrongdoing, it does raise a broader issue of public visibility and trust in how critical national resources are managed. From a governance perspective, however, there are reasons for this structure. Water markets are complex and involve multiple layers of private ownership, corporate structures, and investment funds. Full public disclosure of every individual holder may not always be legally or practically feasible, especially within existing regulatory frameworks. As the exchange continues, the discussion also shifts into a broader critique of government policy and consultation with rural communities. Hanson argues that farmers are being left behind, while environmental and regulatory priorities dominate decision-making. The minister, on the other hand, draws a clear boundary, stating that many of these concerns fall outside the scope of the specific bill being debated. This highlights a common tension in parliamentary systems. Debates often become platforms for wider political grievances, even when the legislation under discussion is limited in scope. This can create frustration on both sides, as systemic issues cannot always be resolved within a single policy instrument. Ultimately, what this exchange reveals is a much larger national question. Should water be treated primarily as a market-based asset regulated by supply and demand, or should it be more tightly controlled as a public good with stricter limits on trade and ownership? Both sides of this debate present valid concerns. Market systems offer efficiency and flexibility, but they can also create inequality during periods of scarcity. Strong public control ensures fairness and access, but may reduce economic efficiency and investment flexibility. For viewers watching this exchange, the key issue is not just who is right or wrong, but how Australia chooses to balance these competing priorities in the long term. So the question becomes, should water remain a tradable economic asset, or should it be treated as a strictly protected national resource?